Hello everyone, I hope you've had a good morning. I've just joined you. So I am Director of Communications and part of the leadership team at the Evangelical Alliance. So I look after the communications and editorial, including Threads, which is our 20s and 30s collective that I'm going to talk a bit about later on, but also our membership and fundraising. The Evangelical Alliance is one of those organisations that people have heard of but often don't know what we do. So we are about advocacy, uniting the church and speaking on the church's behalf to Parliament and the media. Also mission, equipping the church to make Jesus known in our society. And also unity, coming together and putting aside our denominational differences to work together for the sake of mission. So we have around 3,600 churches that are members and 600 organisations. So that's a kind of picture of who we are. So I wanted to speak first of all a bit about some research that we have done recently at the Alliance. Last year we launched a piece of research called Building Tomorrow's Church Today. And it stemmed from the work of our One People Commission, which is a body of Christian denominational leaders from across ethnic minorities who kind of meet together regularly to pray together and plan together for mission. One of the things that kept coming up in the One People Commission was a kind of misunderstanding of the millennial generation. A lot of church leaders were saying to us that they wanted to know more about the people in their 20s and 30s who were in their churches. So we carried out a survey of 1,700 people aged between 18 and 37. So lots of kind of confusion or, I guess, misunderstanding about what the millennial age group is, but we put it at 18 to 37. And the need for the resource came out of really honest conversations, and it showed our commitment as heads of denominations and network leaders and church leaders to hear from this generation in our churches so that we can better equip them. So what we found that millennial churchgoers do on the whole feel equipped by their church. And they were most likely to say that their church helped them to, number one, connect with God at 63%. Obviously these are statistics, so you could read them as negative if you want, but I'm going to go for positive for the first lot. Connect with God. Same percentage felt that their church helped them to connect with other Christians. 58% said their church helped them to use their skills and gifts to serve God. 52% was increase their understanding of the Bible. And probably the most worrying statistic is that only 50% thought that their church helped them to transform their life to become more like Christ. But millennials are also quite frustrated with church. There are areas in which millennials feel like their churches are not helping them in areas of their life and their faith. 1 in 5 say that their church isn't helping them to live out their faith at work. And the same number feel that their church isn't really helping them to develop leadership skills and experience. 23% said that their church isn't helping them in social action. But the highest percentage in terms of what they felt their church didn't do was 36% said their church isn't really creating opportunities for them to meet a marriage partner. 1 in 5 said that they are frustrated with their church often and think of leaving. And the most saddening statistic for me is that nearly half of millennials who took the survey have been really hurt by others in the church that they attended. So I'm going to go a bit further back into the kind of wider landscape. We did some research a few years ago and found that the Evangelical Alliance was not reaching all generations. A very, very small percentage of our membership were under the age of 40. And that seemed to be also true for many churches, particularly outside London. We found some really worrying statistics. One was from Peter Briley's research pulling out of the nosedive. And it found that in just 2 decades, the number of 20-somethings attending church has halved. And according to the most recent English church census, only 3 out of every 100 people in their 20s attend church. So 3 out of every 100 people in their 20s attend church. And our own research of our own membership found that while in 1998, a quarter of our members were aged between 18 and 34, just a decade later, this was down to just 3%. So this was a problem for us, obviously, in terms of being representative of the UK Church, but also we feared that we might not exist in 20 years if we had no members under that age. We realised that this was very much a picture that was being replicated across the UK. We looked at some research from David Kinnaman of Barna Group in the US, who wrote some really helpful things in a book called You Lost Me, which is about the millennial generation and why they are leaving churches. He wrote this: "To many young people who grew up in Christian churches, Christianity seems boring, irrelevant, sidelined from the real issues that people face, and it seems shallow." And linked to this, we also were finding that lots of Christians or people who grew up in churches left at some point in their kind of early 20s, maybe when they went to university, or maybe just after they left university, when life started to happen, when they faced depression, eating disorders, doubt, not having a job, being single, being infertile, all those kind of real life issues. And it felt like churches hadn't necessarily built a robust faith in these young people that was able to withstand the challenges that life brings. So we at the Evangelical Alliance felt that we had to do something about it. And we looked at whether we should kind of launch a Evangelical Alliance youth version, or whether we had to totally rethink what we were going to do for that generation that would meet its needs. And so we launched something called Threads, which you can find at threadsuk.com. Threads is an online collective of Christians in their 20s and 30s exploring faith and life. It's run by my team at the EA, but we have daily articles that have been written by a team of over 300 contributors on different subjects, including all those things I spoke about before: doubt, eating disorders, but also politics, film, church culture, gender. But the most popular articles are about relationships, singleness, marriage, and everything in between. From is a coffee a real date, to an A to Z guide of Tinder, to how long should you date before you get engaged? Is it 3 weeks or 3 years? We had people writing from 2 different perspectives. And Threads has also proved to be a safe space for sharing our questions and our fears and our doubts. What we try to do through Threads is show that we haven't got it all figured out, but that God is still sovereign. So the kind of word Threads is about the different threads in my life, whether it's my relationship status or my political views or the church that I go to. We all have different threads that make us up, but also there is this one God thread that runs through all of that. So I also just want to share with you a kind of personal perspective on my kind of thinking about marriage and singleness in the church. So I grew up on Disney films, and along with a negative body image message that I absorbed, accompanying the wish to one day be a Disney princess, was the belief that life would be a fairy tale, and that I'd meet Prince Charming shortly after puberty, and we'd live happily ever after. And growing up on Disney meant my number one aim in life, alongside a whole host of other achievements, obviously, was to be loved, to be attached, to be beautiful and successful and secure and fertile, to get a ring on it and to pop out some babies. And it seemed to me that the church wasn't far removed from Disney's fairy tales. But unfortunately for any Christian woman who only wants to date and marry a Christian man, the odds are stacked against us. And the church, the place in which we're supposed to find said man, as well as wholeness and acceptance and the love of God, can be the loneliest place on earth. Because for a significant proportion of single Christians in this country, church is not a welcoming place. Rather, it's a place where they feel isolated and ignored, and it is a place of hurt. I'm sure that some of the statistics and some of the findings that we found in the survey of feeling really hurt might have something to do with how relationships are viewed in the church and a sense of loneliness and isolation. For them, church is not inclusive and open-armed, but exclusive and a home for happy families. While this may not be the intention, this is the perception among many single Christians. I'm not going to go over some of the statistics I'm sure David went over earlier on about the statistics of singletons in the church, but it can be a very lonely place if you are single. Marriage is a great thing. So I got married 3 months ago, and I'm really happy. But I spent 30 years in churches where singleness was not something that was celebrated. So we as church leaders need to be really careful of ensuring that a message doesn't creep in which suggests that singleness is a waiting room, or worse still, some kind of limbo before you achieve the holy grail of a relationship and marriage. As if you somehow have to prove yourself or prove that you are happy and fulfilled as a singleton, that you are somehow totally at peace with your singleness. And then, at that moment, God will provide your Christian partner to you as a well done, my good and faithful servant. We teach women in particular in the church that they need to make themselves perfect, physically, emotionally, and spiritually, before they can get a man. But by that token, it would mean that married people are better than everyone else. And such messages are particularly dangerous for millennial Christians, half of whom are already frustrated with church and don't find it a place of freedom. Millennials are inherently suspicious when a picture is painted of the one and only way in which we're supposed to live life. So no Christian talk can ever be complete without a quote from the one and only John Stott, who said this: "If marriage is good, singleness is also good." It's an example of the balance of Scripture that although Genesis 2:18 indicates that it is good to marry, 1 Corinthians 7 verse 1 says that it is good for a man not to marry. So both the married and the single states are good. Neither is in itself better or worse than the other. It's okay and it's a good thing to want to find love. But how can we encourage and equip millennial Christians to balance that search for love with feeling completely secure in themselves and in God, regardless of their relationship status? John Stott again said, "God created us as social beings. Love is the greatest thing in the world, for God is love. And when he made us in his own image, he gave us the capacity to love and to be loved." So we need each other. Yet marriage and family are not the only antidotes to loneliness. So finally, what are the implications of all this for church leaders? First of all, we need to understand the unique experiences and concerns of millennials. They are doubting, they are hurting, they are lonely, but they're also inquisitive and they are asking questions. We also need to listen, both to the younger people themselves, but the words that we ourselves are preaching from the pulpits. What are we saying to our young people, to our millennials, about their inherent value, whether they are single or married? And we also need to prayerfully reflect on the implications for each of us in our own contexts.